Welcome to Screencast Notes for Chapter 16, Part 1. I'd like to start this segment of notes in this unit for Quiz 1, Chapter 16, 17, and part of 18. And just get it out there for the record that I recognize that different individuals in society have different feelings toward and opinions of the idea of evolution. For some people, it cuts to the moral fabric of their faith belief, and I want to acknowledge that that is a reality for some people, and also make sure that you understand from my teaching perspective, that is not my intent to call out anyone's beliefs or make anyone feel uncomfortable. That's not why I do this work. The reason I'm called to teach this is to prepare you. I want to prepare all of my students who go and venture out into the world, and if you were to study biology in the future, this is material that you would be expected to know. Knowing something isn't the same as internalizing it as part of your faith belief system. So, again, I just want to acknowledge that if you feel uncomfortable or bothered by the fact that we're studying this, know that it is not my intent to make you feel that way. My intent is to give you knowledge of a topic that you will need to show mastery of if you were to pursue life science in any way, shape, or form in your profession. So even if you took a general bio class in college somewhere else, this is what they would expect you to know at the end of it. So these are some key ideas we're going through. So as we move forward, just know that I'm not out to change anybody's belief set, only to inform you of the key ideas related to this concept in biology that I hope you can see some connection with what we learned in genetics. Chapter 16 has us thinking about or framing the idea of evolution in some underlying assumptions that we have to make as the researcher or the learner. And we have to talk about observations that we can see firsthand versus the idea of inference and what an inference means. And so when we're studying a past that we are not privy to firsthand, we have to rely on observations that lead to inferences. So we're going to spend a little time talking about that. So when we draw conclusions about ancient Earth and the organisms on it, we are making an assumption that nature operated back then the same way that it does now. The natural laws of physics and chemistry and biology, they operated the same back then as they do today. So that is something to make sure that you understand, that when we're drawing inferences about the past, we have to assume that that's how things operated back then. Another thing to consider is that human belief systems about our world predate what we'd refer to as the modern approach to doing science. So science as a studied discipline academically, that's relatively new in context of all of human history. So there's limited, and so when we talk about doing science, we're limiting our understanding to the empirical evidence of the physical and observable universe. Whereas much of our human belief systems stem from things that we can't see, things that we feel, things that we believe at a deeper level than something that we can necessarily see. And so that would get into our faith beliefs. And so those things predate anything that's ever been done from a scientific perspective, at least from a recorded scientific perspective. Aristotle, about 2,000 years ago, was one of the first naturalists. And so what's a naturalist? Well, they are people who observe life in all its various forms, but they come at it from a scientific perspective. So they observe, they question, and strive to understand the natural laws that underlie the physical universe. That kind of thinking, naturalist thinking, was obviously part of human belief systems before Aristotle, when it came to learning the ecology of the land around us to survive, find food, help build shelter, and those kinds of things. Medicines, all of that originated well before Aristotle. But from, again, academic perspective, Aristotle is sort of credited with one of the first to begin sort of a more formal observation and questioning and categorizing of life. Some more underlying assumptions, observations, and inferences. Colonialism and the spreading out of Europeans throughout the globe in efforts to find riches and resources and map making as a part of that process. That is where much of our observations came from that led us to the inferences about life and early life on this planet. So when they would get to these new places that the Europeans hadn't studied before, and science was newly emerging as a formal field of study, they ended up sharing and learning about plants and animals from other places in the world and from other societies. And so there was this cultural bridge being formed about life in other places. And again, leading to new observations and making us ask some questions about all of these different life forms. So this wealth of new information that was coming in and coming back to Europe as people would come back with their information and their new resources of wealth, they ended up, again, stirring up a lot of questions in the naturalist circles, the people that were the academics of the day. And they also were coming from their own belief systems that were also influenced by the extent of our understanding of the natural world. So we have belief systems before science as an official field of study becomes something, comes into being. But then our belief systems are also influenced by what we know about the natural world. As we get more information about how the natural world works, our belief systems are broadened and expanded. And what was happening in the naturalist circles of the day was that beliefs that they had held before were inconsistent with the systematic observations of the natural world that were starting to be revealed. This idea was starting to emerge that organisms and the natural world changes over time. That is not static. It doesn't stay the same. So people were kind of butting up mentally and up against these inconsistencies. So more and more extensive observation of the natural world wasn't fitting very well with the prevailing belief systems that people had had. There were collective findings in the fields of biogeography, comparative morphology, and geology that were leading to new ways of thinking about the natural world that aligned better with the evidence that they were seeing. So, from all of this observation and the inferences that came from that, they were challenging their underlying assumptions about the world prior to this exploration time and began to question whether or not species had changed over time. That's what the evidence that they were finding seemed to suggest. So organisms or species changing over time, that's evolution. So the prior belief in most societies was that on Earth there was a fixed set of species that exist as is and never change. But now that was getting called into question with the evidence that was emerging from scientific study. So in questioning and studying a past that you weren't privy to, because you weren't there to see the changes happen, they were too slow and too long ago, then the only way to make sense of it is to rely on inference. So we're going to talk about inference. What is that? Well, to infer means to look at the direct evidence in front of you and draw a conclusion that makes sense. So if you were to be flying over the landscape and see this big crater on the ground, you would make an inference that some object from space came into the Earth's atmosphere and hit Earth and created this spot. So a meteorite hitting the Earth surface could do this. I'm not actually seeing the meteorite. Maybe I could infer that it happened and look for evidence in the soil particles that a meteorite was here. But I'm drawing an inference. I'm not seeing it firsthand, but the evidence is suggesting this is what might have happened. Digging a little further, this is a notable line from when a meteorite did hit the Earth around the Yucatan Peninsula. And where this little pocket knife is, gives you a little sense of scale. Below here in the fossil record are dinosaurs, and above here are no dinosaurs. So this is the layer of rock where dinosaurs went from being a part of the ecosystem to not existing anymore as living creatures. This is also when it is thought that a meteorite off of the Yucatan Peninsula hit Earth and made such a cloud of dust that it changed Earth's climate immensely and caused the dinosaurs to die out. That's the best we can do with the evidence we have, drawing an inference from that evidence that as to the conclusion of where the dinosaurs went. So we will pick up with geology for part 2.